Hello. I think, so we are, thank you all for coming to this section. I know that most of you probably already know that this conference is part of, or it's being organized by the action coast called Oral NEET Youth, and this is a coast action that started last year, and it will we will do work until the next 3 years. And at the moment, this coast action has more than 32 countries involved and more than 90 participants. So my name is Maria Fernandes, and I will try to moderate this section. We have we have four presenters today. I'm not sure if the first one is here. If Gamze, if you are, please let me know. Otherwise, we will start with Paul, that will talk about life and work pedagogy towards supporting rural youth transition from school into the labor. Then we will have Amanda, Paul comes from Ireland, I think, and Amanda comes from Portugal. And she will talk about, she will give a talk on professional development perspectives across gender and age groups of underqualified rural. And then we have the final presenter that I think it's came from Syria, Salman, and he will give a talk on the potential of youth involvement into farming in Syria, exploring the incentives of agriculture-educated students. So at the moment we have three presenters. Hopefully we will have the fourth one meanwhile. Otherwise, I think three are good enough to a good section. So I will give Paul the floor, but before that, I just want to remind you a couple of whole rules for the section. I would like to ask you to keep your micro mute, and also if you need to do something else, please also mute your camera and try to ask questions in the chat. So we will have, at the end of the presenters, we will have 10-15 minutes to some discussion, but please feel free to ask questions during the presentations in the chat. Again, thank you all very much for being here, and Paul, the floor is yours, so you can start.
Maria, if I could just confirm how long we have roughly per speaker.
Yes, 10 minutes, 10-12 minutes.
Perfect. That's okay, thank you. I'm sure I'll go over. I'll just share my screen, 1 second. Okay, and I need to go here. Yes. Okay. You can see my slides? It's okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
Fine.
Okay, so the title of my presentation is Life World Pedagogy Towards Supporting a Rural Youth Transition from School and into the Labour Market, or further education, should that be the choice. This is an early stage project which has just been funded from a national funding organisation to develop a programme that can link both formal and non-formal education, specifically around to support students who are at risk or already in NEET categories, or falling into already in NEET categories. And this presents some significant challenges for educators, both in the formal and non-formal setting. And so the aim of this presentation is to reflect very briefly on the field of rural youth education and their transition into the labour market, some of the challenges that are experienced from both pedagogical challenges, more so in the formal and non-formal sector or informal sector, and then to present a response pathway to addressing an extent overarching ontological challenge that frames, that will frame any intervention that is developed as part of this project. So a little bit of background about myself. I'm an initial teacher educator, a researcher in education more generally and specifically, as you can imagine from my attendance at this conference, I'm particularly interested in rural NEETs and those at risk of falling into that category. And I specialize in design research methods, so solving problems and then contributing to theory along the way. And so some of the issues around formal education are quite global or quite general or to most contexts, in that there are three broad pillars to formal education, or that might characterize it, and that's the idea of core subjects. You know, these very defined, well boxed out subjects that have very specific interactions. Rigid terminal examination processes that test very narrow versions of or pieces of information in a particular way, score, and then that support what is very much a linear transition into further higher education or the labour market, with exit points and jumping off points at various stages. Now, not all young people take those opportunities or are able to take those opportunities that are presented to them. But if we take the formal education sector as a whole, you can roughly be characterized by those three pillars. From an institutional perspective. In the non-formal or informal sector, we have flexible topics. In contrast, we have real-world subject relatedness. It's anchored in the lived experience of the student. There's an absence of rigid terminal examination processes. We have completion of tasks and projects and problem solving modules that are well designed for specific life world experiences. And then we have non-linear engagement and related engagement, and it is related to the labour market. So very often it is a pick and mix almost of what people would like to do as they go forward towards achieving what might be ultimately a labour market recognised outcome. And so the challenge that is presented for those at risk and those supporting those at risk of falling into the category of rural NEETs, they are particular and particularly important from the perspective of educators, those who might seek to engage and mitigate some of the challenges that these students would experience. And that's the terminal examination processes can make it difficult for students to return to education should they have left. So the machine keeps moving. And once time has been spent outside of the system, it's very difficult to come back in and then pick that up again at the pace at which they were expected to do. And whether that's a bespoke program or a traditional route, the challenges are the same. Terminal examination processes can often negatively influence classroom pedagogy. So what we have downward pressure from what are high stakes examinations onto the education system, which can squeeze out those most at risk of falling out of the system as well. So the conditions are such that students find it difficult to reintegrate. And then the non-formal flexibility can seem attractive. However, very often the demands skills, knowledge and abilities that are normally acquired at certain points in the formal system. So when we put these two together in both the formal and non-formal setting, we have these challenges that are particular to both and relevant to both in a particular setting. So it's posited here in this presentation and this early stage project that this challenge is compounded by competing theories of learning. Okay. So if we explore the challenge a little further, constructivism in many contexts, although not always, dominates formal schooling. However, it is often confined to subject-specific learning experiences that are limited in their real-world application. Very often, they are connected by the pedagogue, by the teacher in the active teaching to a real-world context, but very rarely are they situated by students because of terminal examination processes. In contrast, this is often at odds with the expectation of the labour market, where sociocultural application or placing learning or problem solving in the lived experience of a particular student, informed by that lived experience, that's the expectation of the labour market, in that can they translate what they've learned in school into the labour market. And this is not always an easy thing to do. We see this with high-performing academics, academic outputs from masters and undergraduate students who struggle to make that smooth transition into employment. It's even more difficult for those who are at risk of falling out well below or well before they get that opportunity. And young people can often get caught in the middle of these unreconciled ontologies as they try to make connections between the interdisciplinary nature of their life world and the school subjects, often their own. So the challenge faced by all stakeholders working with NEETs for those at risk of falling into this category is, how do we reconcile these competing ontologies in order to reduce the risks associated with making the transition from formal and non-formal education contexts into the world of work? And it's a big question. And so it's contended here that educators in both formal and non-formal settings can find common ground at what we might call the edges of their respective roles, almost edge computing like, in that they operate in the fog at the edge of their remit in order to connect with those who are in formal and non-formal, or vice versa. However, in order to facilitate this engagement without creating a new institution of education, we require that this needs to be facilitated, this pedagogical boundary crossing, if you want to call it that, or we would like to call it that. A reconciliation of the aforementioned competing ontologies is required that heretofore has not really emerged from the literature or applied research dissemination in any way that is usable in the NEET or those at risk of falling into NEET categories. And so life world pedagogy, as we call it initially, refers to an approach to engaging marginalized youth and those at risk of falling into NEET categories. The theory underpinning this approach is a thematic construct of a non-dualist ontology emerging from sociocultural and constructivist theories of learning. And so by considering pedagogy at, or what we might approaching the edges of perceived mutually exclusive spheres of education, such as formal and non-formal, which aren't easily reconciled by those who facilitate and direct education within them, life world pedagogy situates learning near the edges of educational context as instead of exclusively within it. And so to dig into this a little bit more, so taking this perspective, we offer a framework up as to what this might look like as a theoretical framework for the development of our project. And that's the characterization of the key pillars of formal and non-formal education reconciled under these non-dualist terms as adapted from Packer et al. In 2000. And there are 6 pillars or terms associated with this. And that's that people are constructed or reconstructed through their interactions. And if we think about formal and non-formal education spheres being close or touching, at the edges of these, students as they transition in and out or consider transitioning in and out or constructing their own identity in many ways, as number 6, as they search for that. Social context is important. So the placing, even from a pedagogical perspective, of problem solving in the formal and non-formal and switching in between is important, and how students are engaged in that process. Practical activity is absolutely necessary. So we see that more sociocultural aspect of it as well, and that can be brought into the formal and reconciled with the non-formal. And then sustained human relationships. And this is important, in that education is not removed from the lived experience of the student, and that relationships are built up through the educational experience by students, and so that they have a pathway in front of them to transition into the world of work. And then multiple community memberships, they have costs which can be a benefit and a drawback, in that they can develop the life skills and resilience to deal with those costs, and then how that they might mitigate those going forward. And so with that framework in place, our next steps then are such. We feel that the necessity for the development of educator pedagogical adaptivity further complicates work in this field. And what we mean by this is that formal educators do very well on the fly in the classroom, dealing with issues as they arise specific to the curriculum, and such that, and similarly for those in non-formal education, reconciling these two will take time and some work, and it complicates what we want to do. The relationship that can exist between school, local context and pedagogy, both in theory and in practice, has the potential to establish sustainable models of engagement that may help rural youth transition from school into the next steps of their lives. And this needs to be examined and developed. And we certainly feel that more work is needed in developing an understanding of this relationship and formalizing supports to all stakeholders who strive to support a transition of rural students into the labour market and or into further education. So that's our project. That's where we're starting. This is our framework that we're putting forward. We're hoping to develop this further in the months ahead, and would welcome any questions that you might have in relation to this if we have time.
Thank you, Paul. So now I'm sure you have questions for Paul, but hold on a little bit. Now we will hear about the work conducted by Amanda Nunes Almeida. If you can start by presenting yourself, just a quick presentation.
I'll do my best.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I'm trying to share the screen.
I think you are allowed to do it, yeah.
If it were the first time that happened to me, but it isn't.
So,
Okay.
yeah. You need a few.
Let me see if now it will work. Sorry.
Okay, so
I guess now. Yes, I'm having trouble here.
okay, so I will give you a few minutes, and maybe is there any question for Paul at the moment? No? So actually, Paul, if you don't mind, I would like to understand a little bit more this approach that you are proposing. If you can just explain me how this works in practice.
Yes, and that will be the great chat. Thank you for that very difficult question, Maria. I really appreciate it. No, you're correct. I mean, one of the big challenges we have is system or operationalizing this theory. And so how do we get from what looks to be like a very well reconciled model for constructivism and socioculturalism as a learning theory and to applying that in practice? And our next steps are to explore that. We have developed a network called Lantern that is focused on literacy and numeracy and the development of literacy and numeracy skills with young people, both in formal and non-formal contexts. And we're going to use that project then to test different ways with those involved in those sectors of how their pedagogy can be married. So we see very clear pedagogy in formal and very clear pedagogy in non-formal, but they don't really go well very often together. And obviously we have challenges around content knowledge, subject matter. We have skills that are specific to educators. And what we're trying to do is come up with an approach that will help teachers in the formal setting mitigate the challenges or the risk of a student falling out by looking at their content and then seeing how non-formal and informal educators deal with that in order to keep students engaged and to bring that into the formal setting. And obviously then as well, in the other side of the coin, in the non-formal setting, to get non-formal educators to look at what formal educators are doing and to bring some of that in with the hope that a student may return to the more traditional pathway or the formal education setting. And I know that's not the case for every student. And in that process and in that deliberation and that discovery phase of this, it's a design thinking paradigm we're using. So in our discovery phase or empathy phase, we're hoping that we're going to find common ground here. And then we'll be able to underpin this with the non-dualist terms that were presented. So I think we're probably about a year away from having a good example of what that might look like. And that's why we call it, life world pedagogy, and that students transition between these two things, constantly looking for touchstones. Where is Pythagoras' theorem in my world? Why am I ever going to use it? You know, and there are examples all around us. Is that they're not obvious to a student, whereas a non-formal educator might actually immediately say that's where it is. Just as a very crude example. So I think we need to understand more about how to support students in both contexts and how to transition between, with a view to keeping them in as long as possible. So no clear answer just yet, but that's the plan.
Okay, thank you. Amanda, are you ready?
I hope so, I guess.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, okay, we did it. Yeah, can you see my screen now?
Yes, it's fine. You can.
First of all, thank you for having me. It's such an honor. This work that I'm going to present is a result of my master thesis, which I did under the guidance of Francisco Simões, which by now you already know who he is, the chair of this cost action. And it resulted at the publication of an article at the Journal of Community Psychology. So I'll try to introduce here why we thought about talking about this NEET issue from this perspective. First of all, the experience of being a NEET can be extremely challenging for one's self-esteem. We all know that the NEET is a very broad definition, but to the majority of them are in this situation not because they want to, but because they are forced to be in it. Well, if it is challenging for NEETs in general, for rural NEETs, it is even worse. We have professional development barriers. We have a very narrow job market. We have limited training offers, and we have also the mobility barriers. Also another thing that does not contribute for this youth's self-esteem, overall sense of competence, it's that youths living in the countryside show even lower educational attainment and professional qualifications when compared to those living in towns. So they also have they are also more vulnerable because of that. And to add more to this scenario, we also already know that rural NEETs are also profoundly vulnerable regarding socioeconomic status indicators. Not only because they have limited resources, but when we are talking about rural NEETs and how to overcome these mobility barriers, the lack of resources can be a very big obstacle in order to do that. The main concept we are going to talk about here is self-efficacy, the main Bandura's definition regarding the belief in one's capabilities of achieving a certain goal, perceived barriers, individual beliefs about constraints or on current or future vocational development, professional expectations, which mean future expectations about professional opportunities that shape the present behavior, and the socioeconomic status, which is a measure of one's social position within a power hierarchy. And we take some socioeconomic status indicators such as income, wealth, prestige, and etc. Our main goals here our study aims at understanding rural underqualified NEETs professional development and perspectives, and understand how these NEETs self-efficacy perceptions are associated with their perceived barriers and professional expectations, accounting for the influence of socioeconomic status. And we also want to know how these relationships can vary across gender and age groups. The study location. Well, we did this at the Azores Islands. We are a Portuguese archipelago of 9 islands. We are for a 2-hour flight from Lisbon. We are a very small region. but we have 9 islands. So the rural NEETs that live here not only have the mobility barriers very geographically exposed, but we also have a lot of mobility barriers within the islands themselves. The region right now is in a process of demographic contraction. The archipelago population depicts low levels of education, although it has been increasing in the past few years. The rate of upper middle school conclusion is the 6th lowest in the country and below the national average. And also we have another problem here, which is the early school living rate is very high and well above the national rate. Okay. So the hypothesis we intended to study have to do with these relationships between self-efficacy, perceived barriers, and professional expectations, and how they will behave regarding the gender and age groups. So I'll not stress much of this hypothesis here. Later, if you want, I can speak more specifically due to the very little time we have. Our study included 188 NEETs between the ages of 18 and 29 years old that were registered at a local public employment agency. Most of them were aged between 18 and 24 years old, and also most of them were female. Here we have the measures that we used to know about our participants. Regarding the procedure, we contacted our regional government, and they indicated a total number of 403 potential participants that met our criteria, which were being NEET and having attained secondary education at the most. 215 replied to invitation, but only 188 delivered written consent, because whenever they receive the letters, communications from this employment agency, our idea is that they only the image of this agency logo tells them right away that is mandatory to participate. But when they came to the study and I told them it was not mandatory, it was voluntary, some of them didn't want to proceed. Regarding our results, our first hypothesis was about higher self-efficacy would lead to lower perceived barriers and higher professional expectations. What we found is that higher self-efficacy was associated with stronger perceived barriers after accounting for the effects of training offers and income. And that was something we were not expecting. The study in which we based this hypothesis combined both low and high qualifications, so maybe that's why we had a different result. That could be justified by some cognitive processing mechanisms, such as generalized optimism, resulting in overrating of personal abilities. This positive self
I think we lost Amanda. So actually, I thought that I lost her. So, so maybe we can go ahead with the third presenter, and hopefully she will come back. Ibrahim Salman, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
good afternoon, everyone.
I'm sorry if I'm not sure if I pronounce your name
Yes,
the right way.
correct.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
correct. Ibrahim Salman, that's correct.
So, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah,
I think you can share the screen.
So just please tell me if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can
it's
see
fine.
it.
Okay, super. Thank you very much. So just before I start, I would like to introduce myself very briefly. My name is Ibrahim Salman. I am from Syria. I am a postgraduate student at Czech University of Life Sciences, Faculty of Tropical and Free Sciences. And today I will be talking about the potential of youth involvement into farming in Syria, exploring the incentive of agricultural educated students. So as we know, many young people around the world, they have negative perception towards agriculture. And according to them, working in agriculture is a second class job waiting for a better job. This negative perception among young people for agriculture job leads to exacerbate youth unemployment, especially in agriculture sector, handicapping any hope for the rural development in the rural areas. So in Syria, the income from agriculture are declining every day. So the rural household cannot just rely on the income from the farm. So the off-farm income also consists an important source for income. In Syria, a large of Syrian citizens are moved to work out of the agricultural sector, particularly in the service sector, for instance, selling to grain, fuel station, and so on. Also because the low wages and the lack of experience in the labor market considered so one of the most obstacles to play an important role in the lack of success of the school to work in transition process. Also, the institutions that deal with employment issue in Syria play a very small role in helping young people to have access or join to the labor market. There are many factors influencing the intention to work in agriculture. The first factor is the contentment to the rural way of living. If the young people are attracted to live in the rural area or not. Also parents' opinion, because many of young people find themselves when they don't have any choice to choose their career in the future when they are guided by their parents. Different influence also play an important role because many young people before, for example, entering the university or like searching for a job, they are getting advice from their friends. The last factor is socioeconomic factors, for instance, gender, because male and female, they have different perception toward agriculture as a job. The main research aim of our study is to identify the factors influencing the intention to work in agriculture among agriculture students at Tishrin University in Syria. More specific aims in our study is that to explore the impact of respondent socioeconomic factors on their intention to work in agriculture. Also to examine the influence to contentment to the rural way of living on their intention to work in agriculture. And the last one is to investigate the influence of parent opinions and friend influence on their intention to work in agriculture. Our methodology, from this map, we can see the location of the study area, the location of Tishrin University, where I conducted my research. Tishrin University is the biggest university in Syria, located in Latakia. Latakia is a part of the Syrian coast. Syrian coast considers an important agriculture zone in Syria. The main crops in the Syrian coast are olives, warehouses, and citrus. We used questionnaire survey and we conducted 100 respondents during the period on September 2019. We used face-to-face interviews with the respondent in Arabic language. So from this map, we can see the sample distribution. So as an university hosting different students from different parts of Syria, so as we can see, we have different respondents from different parts of Syria, but most of them from the Syrian coast. Also, we have respondents from the north of Syria, Aleppo, Al-Raqqa, and from the center of Syria, Homs. So we used SPSS and Excel softwares to analyze the data. Also, we used binary logistic regression to investigate the factor influencing the intention of a student to work in agriculture. And the model was tested for multi-connectivity using VIF. Here we can see the model specification. We have the dependent variable is the intention to work in agriculture and its measurement, and we have 10 independent variables. The 10 independent variables are gender, father occupation, mother occupation, family income, family ownership of agricultural land, and the future living, farm experience before entering the university, and contentment to the rural way of living, parents' opinion, and friends' influence. For the parents' opinion and friends' influence, we use Likert scales. So our result, we can see from the table too that the majority of our respondents were female, and 66% of our respondents, they had intention to work in agriculture. In regard to father and mother occupation, we found that the majority of our respondents of father and mother occupation were not agriculture. And we found that 56% of our respondents family ownership and agricultural land. Also, we found the majority of our respondents, 60%, they have farming experience before entering at the university. And most of them are attracted to the rural way of living. In regard to the parents' opinion, we found that most of the respondents agree and strongly agree on their parents' opinion that studying agriculture helps to find a job in the future. In regard to friends' influence, we found that the majority of respondents disagree and strongly disagree on this statement. Here from table 3, we can see the distribution model. So we found that there are 4 factors influencing the intention to work in agriculture, and the strongest factor was the farming experience. So we can say students who has farming experience before entering the university, they are 25 times more likely to get a job in agriculture. The other factors that influencing the intention to agriculture are contentment to the way of living, parents' opinion, and friends' influence. So our discussion, so the results highlighted that farming experience is the strongest variable, as we have seen in the previous slide. We can attribute this result with the fact that the majority of our respondents comes from farming background. They have farming background before studying agriculture. Also, we found that the contentment to the way of living also has significant influence on the intention. The result could interpret with a study conducted by Elkai in Russia. Also, an important finding of the survey that respondents influenced by their parents' opinion agriculture, that studying agriculture helped to find a job in the future. This result is similar to other study conducted by Miller in Australia and other study conducted in Nigeria. And the last factor is friend influence. Also, friend influence has a significant influence on the intention. The result is in line in a study conducted in India. Conclusion, as we have seen in the logistic regression, there are 4 variables influencing the intention to agriculture. So we can say that there is a potential to attract young people to work in agriculture. So we can see our finding carries a previous literature on the step forward by providing a set of recommendations. The recommendations are by providing support and investment for practice agriculture before starting higher education could motivate young people and get a view about the job opportunity in agriculture sector. Also, investment in improving the rural area infrastructure in the rural area. Also highlighted the diversity of career opportunity. For example, they can work as a manager for a small farm, large farm, and so on. Also, we recommend future studies that cover large geographic area in the country to gain better insight about the topic. My references. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. Yes. So if you want, you can stop sharing your screen. So now we have a few minutes for questions, comments, reflection. Is there any? Okay. Okay, if you have, you can write in the chat. Maybe I will. Actually, I would like to hear from you both. I think Amanda is not here, but in terms of both of you presented quite different studies or perspectives. But I would like to ask you. How do you see, in terms of policies, what are the major challenges at the moment in the countries that you conducted the studies, and how your own research can influence, or what kind of implications your research has to policies?
I can see it as an issue that there are many students are studying agriculture just because studying agriculture is a secure job. In higher education in Syria, agriculture study is a 5-year period of studying. So after finishing the study, they get a job with government institution. So it's considered a secure job for them. So most of the students, they just like choose to study agriculture to have a job with the government. Because like after finishing the secondary school, what's called in Syria baccalaureate, so they have to choose many options to go to the university. So most of them, they put agriculture like for like third option and 5 options. So according to their grade, they will be entered to the university. So like example, I have many friends who would like it to study, like for example, civil engineering, but their grade not enough to study civil engineering. Therefore, they choose agriculture just to get a job after graduating. So this is the issue.
Paul, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, no, it's a really interesting question because in Ireland, progression to higher education is quite high, or further education and into apprenticeships and so on. However, those students who move into the agriculture sector generally either leave school early or don't progress past the terminal examination. Very often they'll move out of the formal education system ahead of progressing into agriculture. And this is for a number of reasons. Family farms, are quite common in Ireland, both beef and dairy. But very often the student will live at home with the parents, and there's a lack of recognition that they're in a transitional space by policymakers, in that they're moving from what is a secure pathway, although be it linear, to higher education or into agricultural qualifications, such as the one that Ibrahim talked about, but also that they're also in a familial space where income in Ireland for farming isn't as much as people would make it out to be. Indeed, 2/3 of all farmers are part-time farmers and have a second job to support the family farm, both mostly small holdings. And so policymakers in relation to education of the students who are either in that NEET category or at risk of falling into it don't recognize this transitional space where you're either in formal education or you're in not. And that's a problem, because it means that there's a lack of coherent discussion around the two sectors that allows students to make a very conscious decision that to move into non-formal education and have a pathway then to where they want to go. And that pathway allows them to return to formal education should they choose to do that later on. For example, if they take over the family farm, or they go out on their own, or they're engaged in some sort of farming activity, they may need additional skills in order to be able to do that successfully. And so there's a lack of recognition at a policy level that there is a transitional space between the two, and how that's supported specifically with people who are under 25 years of age, because it's a very important age group. And so what I'm hopeful for is that if we can establish in our own study a process methodology, if you will, a pedagogical methodology that can support, a forward and back transitioning of students, in that reconciles that difference, that we may be able to argue for policy that will support students in that place.
Okay, thank you both. We have Mauricio, you have a question, so do you want?
Okay. Yes, particularly I have a question for the last speaker, and I appreciate very much the survey you conducted and the analysis you have done. And I just was wondering if there is maybe, okay, it was not in the data, probably it's difficult to measure, but what about traditional beliefs that the child must take care of the elderly? So the people living in rural areas, especially doing farming, they try to keep their child in the farm. So in order to be ensured that someone will take care of them. So in other words, maybe they may encourage them to stay in agriculture, because if they move to university or elsewhere, they will move away and then they will stay alone. So in the southern Italy, this is very strong, especially against women, because they see daughters as an insurance for their, elderly stage, for their last life. So just was wondering if you consider this.
Yeah, actually, you are talking it's related to farm succession. Actually, right now I'm working in this topic in my studies, but in Syria, most of the youth people would like to migrate from rural area to urban area for getting practical job.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah, but right now in my PhD studies, I'm working on the farm succession. I'm going to investigate the head of farm, his decision on farm succession, and if the farmer children would like to take over the farm, and what factors influencing this process, and what are the obstacles.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So is there any more questions, comments, even between the presenters? If you want to ask each other a question, you can do it. So if not, maybe we should finish at 4 as it's supposed to. So before we go, I would like just to thank you both, and also Amanda. She is not here, but she was in the beginning, so I'm sorry that we lost her. I appreciate your presentation. I really enjoyed to listen. So thank you very much. I would like just to share with you the link for the website of the cost action. I think that maybe you already know, but please feel free to follow us during the next 3 years, because I think that we will have some more interesting events on the topic. So thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed the section and all the conference. Don't forget to also fill the survey with the evaluation of the conference. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.